Welcome to Life is Beautiful. I'm Anthony. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I find infinitely fascinating, and that is the fact that in 2021, the world saw something that I don't think anyone really thought was possible. We saw the fall of a Trappist brewery. Today, I want to talk about the downfall of the Achel Trappist Brewery. The history of Achel Monastery begins in 1648 at the end of the 80 Years' War. The Treaty of Münster between Spain and the Netherlands resulted in anti-clerical policies, including the forbiddance of Catholic Mass within the Dutch Republic. Fearing prosecution, devout followers traveled to the realm of the Prince Bishop of Liege as religious refugees. And it was here that a small chapel was erected in 1656 and populated by a group of religious hermits from the nearby city of Eindhoven, Eichelklus. Eichelklus became known as one of the few remaining bastions of religious freedom for Catholics. And it was in a very interesting location because it was in just a tiny little sliver in between the more secular or more Protestant Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium. I mean, it was kind of like a little island in a sea of non-Catholicity. Until the French Revolution occurred in the 1700s and a lot of anti-clerical policies were set in place, and Eichelklus was forced to abandon its mission, and all the monks and the brothers living within it were forced to flee. The Abbey of Eichelklus would actually remain dormant for nearly 100 years until around 1846, when brothers from the nearby Westmalle Monastery traveled and reconstituted Eichelklus. And it was there in Eichelklus where the Westmalle brothers established the next branch of the Trappist order. They set up a Trappist monastery, and along with Trappist monks came the practice of Trappist brewing. They established a brewery within the walls of Eichelklus, and it was there that they started getting a little bit of a reputation, being known for high-quality beer and servitude to the community. It followed along the lines of the Trappist order perfectly. The first beer, called Peter's Vatia, or Father's Keg, was released from the Eichelklus brewery. Based on what we know about Trappist brewing practices back then, the Father's Keg could have gone one or two different ways. On one hand, a lot of sources say that it was possibly a lighter Peter's beer, a beer low in ABV, but designed to be more for nutrition and hydration than inebriation. The second pathway it could have gone down was something to be a bit stronger, something more for special celebrations, for feasts, for Lenting periods, things that would be so nutritionally dense that it would sustain the monks while they're not eating, but also comes with the fact that it might be slightly stronger in ABV. Both of these options are fairly reasonable to believe because in the modern era and what we know about historical monastic brewing, both of these examples would have been very commonplace. In the Trappist order, we do see extra beers brewed to be lighter, to be more nutritious, more hydracious, less inebriatious. However, they also are known to brew incredibly strong beers, so tosses up. If I had to guess, I would have to say it is more so the latter. If you look at Achel's current brewing practices, their extra beers are actually first running examples of their standard beers, so much, much stronger, where their blonde is typically at around 5 to 7%. Their blonde extra is sitting at around 9.5%. It's reasonable to believe that Achel's original beer might have been of the stronger variety. Achel would continue to grow and prosper all the way up until around World War I, where they were forced to actually flee their monastery due to the ever-encroaching war, the ever-encroaching conflict coming to their door. And in fact, in around 1917, the German imperialistic military actually came to Achel, stripped the brewery of all of its copper and metal works in order to be able to repurpose them into their own war-fighting efforts. Additionally, due to Achel's location along the border of Belgium and the Netherlands, the German military destroyed the Belgian half of the monastery to establish the infamous Wire of Death. Only the Belgian side of the monastery was destroyed in order to not provoke the Netherlands, who remained neutral throughout the World War. Despite being on sacred ground, the Wire of Death killed hundreds of civilians attempting to flee German occupation. Achel would remain dormant for an incredibly long period of time, not actually coming back into working order until after World War II. The monastery was reconstructed in the late 1940s and the brewery was established too. However, at this point in time, it was only for the consumption for the brotherhood within the walls of Achel. It wasn't until 1998 that Achel actually decided to start getting a little more adventurous with their brewing processes. They had Westmalle and Rochefort brewing experts and brewing monks come and help them kind of refurbish their brewery into a little bit more of a capitalistic venture. During this time, Achel produced a small range of beers of various colors and strengths, such as their famous 8% blonde and 9% brown, as well as a now extinct 5% blonde. But what made Achel truly special was their commercialization of their extra beers. As I mentioned earlier, extra beers kind of go one or two different ways within the Trappist order and the pantheon of Trappist beers, but both seem to be relatively exclusive. It's very difficult to come across a Trappist Pater's beer. It's also very difficult to come across a more high ABV, enhanced version of a standardized offering. So Achel going that route, releasing their extra beers commonly to anybody, it was a pretty interesting and unique step for them. Help them stand out amongst some of the other Trappist breweries that were rapidly gaining notoriety and fame for their beers. Other Trappist breweries would start to release special versions of their beers, many years later in the 2010s and whatnot, but Achel was one of the first to do it. And to me, like a beer nerd like me, that's really awesome. It's really interesting to be able to get a peek behind those walls, you know what I mean? Regardless, Achel continued to grow over the next few decades, slowly gaining a name for themselves, but they were never kind of like in the forefront. Chimay is everywhere. Everybody knows Chimay. Westmalle, same thing. And who could forget West Vladerland, the hype beast of them all. All Trappist beer was getting a name for itself. Achel was included in that conversation, but definitely not at the forefront. They were the smallest of all the breweries, of all the Trappist breweries, and they didn't come out with a lot of the more famed styles like your big quads and whatnot. They had their brown and they had their blonde ales. They were definitely making a name for themselves in their own way. And in fact, there was actually several competitions where they were the highest ranking Trappist beer at the competitions. They knew what they were doing. They were making good quality beer. So it kind of became like, for those in the know kind of thing. It's hard to explain, but it was like, there was like a subsect of beer drinkers who knew about Trappist beer. And then it was like those really in the know, they knew Achel. Things were going great for Achel. They were definitely on a rise, but it was ironically a year before they started commercializing their beers to get that namesake that actually started their downfall. In 1997, Achel, along with 7 other Trappist monasteries in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, banded together to form the International Trappist Association. Together, these breweries would establish legal copyright protections to protect the brand name and goodwill amongst customers that authentic Trappist products garnered. The ITA created the Authentic Trappist Products Seal to differentiate themselves from other monastic and abbey products and reinforce the concept of Trappist is quality. In order for a Trappist product to gain the famed seal, the Authentic Trappist product, they had to meet 3 very specific criteria. The beer must be brewed within the walls of a Trappist monastery, either by the monks themselves or under their supervision. The brewery must be of secondary importance within the monastery, and it should witness to the business practices proper to a monastic way of life. And finally, the brewery is not intended to be a profit-making venture. The income covers the living expenses of the monks and the maintenance of the buildings and the grounds. Whatever remains is donated to the charity for social work and to help persons in need. It was this criteria and the ravaging fans that came following after it that helped Achel make a name for itself. However, unfortunately and ironically, it was also this criteria that spelled Achel's downfall. Reports from as early as 2013 began to indicate that Achel Monastery was rapidly running out of Trappist monks to run the brewery and sustain the day-to-day operations of the monastery. Some reports even indicated that Achel only had less than 6 monkish brothers who were continuing to maintain and operate the monastery, and most of them were well over 70 years of age. With Achel's numbers dwindling so rapidly, they actually had to lean on other monasteries, other Trappist monasteries, to be able to provide personnel to keep operations going. Reportedly, fellow Trappist brewing monks from Westmalle would travel to Achel to keep oversight on the brewing productions, which allowed the Achel beer to keep their ATP logo. As Achel's staff continued to age out of service or die, it became infeasible for other monasteries to be able to continue to man their operations. And in 2021, the last few remaining brothers were forced to leave Achel and went to their retirement destinations at the nearby Westmalle. Once the last two Achel Trappist brothers left, Achel did continue in their operations. However, it was not either by the monkish order themselves or under their direct supervision. It was by non-monastic staff, which means Achel had to lose their official authentic Trappist product label. I mean, it was their own rules that forced Achel to lose their authentication. The future of Achel is rather interesting. It does seem that they're going to continue to produce Achel's beers. Their current lineup will still be available on the market, but we're not going to have the official Trappist product logo on it. It's not going to be able to call itself Trappist on it. It's not going to have the authentic Trappist. But it does seem that Achel's beer will be available for the foreseeable future. In fact, the abbot of Westmalle actually said in an interview, "The beer is still brewed under our supervision, so feel free to call it Trappist, but we are no longer allowed to use the logo because there is no longer a living community present in Achel. The beer itself will not change. Its taste and production will not be compromised. On the contrary, we are currently investing in a new, larger brew house. It will be brought into use in the spring." Which places Achel in a very unique category of the pseudo-Trappists, along with other Trappist monasteries who haven't worked out the kinks to be able to call themselves authentic, to include things like Maria Wald in Germany, which we've talked about before, Mons-de-Cats in France, and even to a weirder, lesser degree, we're talking about St. Bernardus in Belgium. But the weird thing is, in that pseudo-Trappist category, Achel is the only one that was once officially a Trappist product. Now here's the really depressing part. Achel's downfall might not be entirely unique. The simple fact of the matter is that Trappist orders across the board have been suffering from manning criticality for many, many years. The Trappist order is just not drawing in people like they maybe once were. In fact, all across the board, it does seem like a rather secular movement is happening on a global scale, and we're seeing shortages in all aspects of religious personnel, ordained personnel. And with Trappists being the strictest of the strict, it makes sense that they get the less of the less. You know what I mean? So it is a scary thought to think that what happened here at Achel might happen across the board. I mean, it can't last much longer at this incredibly fast pace of aging out of service that Trappist brothers are experiencing before there's no longer able to be an authentic Trappist product seal. Eventually, it's going to age to the point where all the Trappist beers fall within this category. They set this up themselves. Their own restrictions are going to be their own downfall. Achel was just the first victim. The fate of Achel beer is possibly the fate of all of Trappist beer. Regardless, thank you for watching, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And remember, there is a story in every bottle, and that life is beautiful.